The following podcast is a Scrum Inc. production.
Dan, first of all, I'm really honored to be speaking with you here in the Pentagon. You're the 26th Secretary of the Army, so thanks a lot for coming on the show.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
So I was doing some research, and the last person who was as young as you are in this job was appointed by George Washington, which is Harry Knox, who was the first Secretary of War.
Oh, interesting.
And I was thinking about it, and he's actually struggling with some of the same issues you are. Because think about it, it was 1789. The Army was not really organized. And so he said, the quote from him is, something is wanting and something must be done, or we shall be involved in all the horror of failure. And it had to be done quick. He had the sense of urgency that we have to do this. And I was thinking about a quote you said recently, it's, we can't waste a single minute. And I wanted to ask you, where does that sense of urgency come from? I'm going to talk about all the transformation, all the agile stuff that you're doing, but what's the why? Why do you feel such urgency to change the way the Army works?
I think there are a couple of things. I'll pick kind of three reasons why we think we have to do it today. The first is if you look at the macro environment of war, if you look at what's happening in Israel and Ukraine and Russia, technology has completely changed how humans will inflict violence on each other. And so for a very long time, you could kind of predict with some semblance of success how your enemy might want to attack you. And it would generally be something linear, like a bullet, or something being launched up that kind of had a predictable curve that would come down on your head. And so if you think of how we designed our tanks and how we kind of built out everything that we do, it was with that mindset. The problem is with drones, they can get you from any direction. And then they're also really cheap. So nation states are no longer necessary to be able to create these tools of war and chaos. And so what that means is if you think about our training, whether it's pulling a tank up over a berm or how we get our special forces in on an objective in the cover of night, the problem is it just doesn't work anymore with acoustic sensors and all of these very cheap, scalable solutions that your enemy may have. And so we're just at an inflection point of war is kind of thing one. Thing two is if you look at kind of the what's going on in the broader world, we have a pacing threat that we are saying is China, and they are able to do things with their commercial sector that we could only dream of because of their kind of lack of formal rules between their commercial private sector and their government kind of warfighting entities. They're able to capture new tools and technologies that aren't even on the market yet and apply those for kind of war functions in a way that, sadly for the Pentagon, for the last 30 or 40 years, I wouldn't even say we're off pace with the commercial sector. In many areas, we're probably a decade or more behind. I'm the Secretary of the Army. I have 2 full-time tech people 30 feet from my desk, and I use this Nipper unclassified system to send emails that are definitionally, we are not that worried about people getting a hold of them because they're unclassified. It takes me 8 minutes every day to get in my email. It's crashing constantly, and it's just this byproduct of this very inefficient bureaucratic system that has lasted for far too long. And then I'd say the third reason we have to go fast is the political air cover right now being provided by President Trump and Secretary of Defense Hegseth is remarkable. We in the first couple of months I was here, did something called Army Transformation Initiative. We call it ATI. And essentially it cut $48 billion of future spending. And if you think about each and every one of those dollars, in this kind of parochial system we have, people thought they were going to their districts and their states and their businesses, and it infuriated the lobbyists and the staff members of the congressmen and the senators who all had committed those dollars to somebody else in advance. And so what was amazing about this process is you could imagine 48 billion reasons people were going to be angry with the Army, and many people have been angry with the Army, and not a single time have the President or Secretary of Defense come down to the Army and told us to change what we're going to do that we think is in the best interest of soldiers. And so all of that basically means, in my opinion, we have got to move with urgency defined as like months or quarters and no longer years or decades.
Interesting. I want to talk about that $48 billion just for a second.
Yep.
that you saved, because of the way our system is set up, how can you use that $48 billion differently? Is that even possible in the current system?
It's a really good question. The answer is we will find out together in the coming weeks, months, and years. We are in kind of what I would define, and I'm very narrowly focused on this, but a battle of the ages to be able to allocate those $48 billion where I and General George, Chief of Staff of the Army, and Sergeant Major of the Army, and Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, through the collective feedback of our entire system, we want to put those dollars into places that don't necessarily align with where Senate and their staff or congressmen and their staff or lobbyists want those dollars to go. If you think about like specifically how we've gotten so many of these bad outcomes, it in a lot of ways, it's very minute spending rules. And so it used to be you'd have like 10 to 12 line items. So Congress would allocate us dollars. They would say, hey, go spend a couple $1 billion on wheeled vehicles. That would be the category. We would go spend the money. We would show them the receipts that matched the billions of dollars they gave us, and all would be good. So we started 30 years ago with 12 line items of specificity where we had to spend. We're now at something like 1,400 line items of what we have to spend on. And then the way our funding cycle works, it's annual. And so every single year we have 1,400 things we have to spend on, and then it resets. And so what it does is it makes it so that when we pick one of those 1,400 things, because of our poor process for choosing, we're already late to the game. It's already outdated, whatever the thing is we're buying. And then it's so hard to change to another thing that we're basically locked into buying outdated things years out into the future. And it's just incredibly hard to change. And then you have all of these lobbyists that go in and defend those 1,400 line items, which makes it even more difficult to change. And so if you look at a lot of the things we're buying, we have 104,000 Humvees.
That's crazy.
That's
just crazy.
It's crazy. And I mean, they're very valuable vehicles in some instances, but we have 104,000 of them. We have 45,000 JLTVs, these very big vehicles that are good on highway and awful on off-road. And if you think back to that threat of drones, it needed to be agile and quick to maneuver and quick to conceal yourself. Those vehicles are just definitionally not what you need in that future fight. And we have just been having knockdown dragouts to basically get our funders to change their mindset that just because we thought we needed a Humvee 7 years ago doesn't mean today we should buy one.
Yeah, often in my work at Scrum Inc., what I think about is how can we reduce the cost of changing your mind? It's like, I think that's an organizational problem that having, and especially in some of these like the Army's big.
Yep.
1.2 million people, right?
1.2 million people, about $200 billion. And I would say in the entire federal government, it would go, the federal government is bad, the Pentagon is worse, and the Army is the very worst at being able to change our minds and act on it.
So how are you, that requires like an operating system change. That's like a fundamental, because what I've seen, you can have a charismatic, strong leader like a McChrystal, for example, come in, do amazing things, but not change the system. And the system just snaps back when you don't have that person anymore. How are you thinking about approaching that? Because you only have a few years in this job, so you got to do stuff quick.
So if you think of the incentive structure across the entire Army, I would say it is broken in many and most instances. And I wish I had General George beside me, my battle buddy, who's the 4-star general in charge of the Army. I think he would echo a lot of these things. If you think, and just to make sure I'm hitting all of the classes of people and not leaving anyone out from the broken system, if you look at the generals first, who gets to become a general is often the person who has stayed in the middle of the system. What doesn't get rewarded is risk-taking oftentimes. What doesn't get rewarded is pushing back. So if you think about our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan as kind of classic examples of a new leader would get there, they would have a red, yellow, green chart. It would start red. By the time they left, it was green. The new commander would come in and it would be red all of a sudden. And it is not to intend to disparage that entire class of leader. It's just to say the system was set up to incentivize them to remain quiet, execute for their year, and go back home. So that has created an entire set of generals and leadership in the Army that have gotten used to that model. If you look at the politicals or the civilians in the Army, basically the only thing that can get you fired is an action that goes wrong. And so what that has incentivized is at every single instance, say no. Create systems that shift the burden of responsibility from you to someone else, keep repeating that, and then everyone along the way has a no right that then goes back to the beginning to start again. And so you had people who had 35, 40-year careers and have said no or done literally nothing the vast majority of those careers. So, I mean, we have 250,000 civilians. I think we have in the Army. We have 35,000 that help us buy and repair our stuff. I mean, it's just
That's a lot of people.
The numbers are staggering. And then if you look at the politicians who allocate the dollars and you look at all the people on their staff, it's actually not incentive. Their short-term feedback loop is not giving soldiers what they need for maybe a war in the future. It's actually doing the thing for the business in their state or in their district or what their lobbyist wants. And so you basically, for 30 or 40 years, haven't had an existential threat to the system to kind of cleanse all of these bad incentive structures. And so for 30 or 40 years, you've had bad decisions pile on top of each other. And now we have this calcified, broken bureaucracy that basically can't output anything of value.
I want to get into the thing about risk, because I think that is absolutely key. I was talking to the head of the Royal Navy, General Sir Gawain Jenkins, the other day. And he said, I was talking about risk and people saying, oh, the risk is too great. We got to diminish risk, diminish risk. You know, it's the greatest risk is being asked to fight a war and losing. And I feel that that isn't necessarily as much in the conversation. Is that the kind of thing you're trying to bring forth?
I think if you think about, and this part has blown my mind. I think the Army is more risk averse than the Pentagon, which is more risk averse than the federal government, which is more risk averse than the civilian sector. Like when I talk to some of these large helicopter manufacturers, and they basically tell me that these airframes that we're flying have 1 million hours of civilian flight on them. And then the Army comes in and is requiring all of these additional tests, which is layering in all of this additional time and cost. The new rotary air asset that we want to build, we first flew in 2018. It has been 7 years since we have done something with it. And we are basically taking that design and now moving it forward for the first time, despite kind of strong preference for it, just because of our own hurdles. I think the risk aversion that exists is so ingrained in our system that it takes something like a President Trump and DOGE to come in and say, you just act quickly with limited information. The preponderance of risk is actually on the inaction side rather than the acting and getting it wrong. And so then if you start to think of things like war, I completely agree with the remark. The problem is until our voters and our citizens and our leaders are feeling the threat of war, it's just a lot easier to be afraid of the one negative externality that comes up in the process versus the kind of harder to measure, well, you didn't act, so we didn't have any negative externalities. But in this very scary moment where it's an existential risk to our nation, are we ready for it? The human brain just sadly isn't particularly well suited to answer that question.
It's interesting you mentioned time, because I've been doing some research on that recently, and there's a really interesting research set that shows that the greatest likelihood for failure of a project or a program is how long it takes to make decisions. And it's pretty dramatic. If it takes less than an hour, usually that's about 75, 80%. They have like 100,000 data points on this. That's like 75% success rate. If it takes more than 5 hours, that drops to like 30%. 5 hours is not a long time. And I was talking to Jim Johnson, who's the CEO of the Standards Group, who did this research. And I said, really, Jim, I mean, 5 hours? He goes, listen, his rule of thumb is every $1,000 you spend on a project, you have to make a decision. He goes, but most of them are trivial. But think about the difference between 10,000 hours and 50,000 hours. It's like, that is a big, big difference. And the greatest risk is time. So we met after you recommended my book, Scrum, The Art of Doing Twice the Word at Half Time, on another podcast. So I want to sort of go back. How did you encounter Scrum and Agile in the beginning, long before you got this job?
So my current, so there's, the Army is a bit confusing in our titling. So we have a chief of staff of the Army who's a 4-star general, been in 35 years. I also, as Sec Army, have a chief of staff. So my chief of staff is a dear friend who I've known for a long time. We worked in venture for a bit together and for some VC-backed companies. And he, at each thing we would do, would basically force every team to read Scrum. And each time, I can remember the first time I read it, like it is just so hard to get used to this concept of not waterfalling out planning, doing these small sprints, being very narrow and deliberate about not adding extra work. Once you pick a goal, execute on it. It all sounds obvious, perhaps, especially to the listeners of this podcast, but each and every time I worked with the current chief of staff with another team to implement it, it just, people were enraged and livid and angry. And like the first couple of months were just so painful, but each time it proved so much more effective than the kind of the alternative model. And so when we got to the Army and Terrence came in, one of the very first things he did with this team is have them read Scrum.
So what's your ambition in using Agile in the Army?
So it's a pretty big beast. And so I think the entire mindset has to change of not just how we procure things or how we build things, how we think about going to war, how we create our strategies for the conflict with a peer like China. It's just all been for the last couple of decades based on these very long waterfall timelines. Like I'll just take procurement as an example.
Okay.
Currently, and I'm oversimplifying a bit, but it's directionally like this. It essentially snakes our process through 16 or 18 different stops. And then any one of those 16 or 18 stops can kick it back to the beginning. Mm-hmm. And so that's what's happened for a very long time. And so when we wanted to build a new lightweight tank, we basically start this process. We spend billions of dollars, many, many, many years, and outputs this tank that is no longer lightweight. It's now medium weight. And so what that practically means is on some of our bases, they measured and they had 12 bridges that could go across 2 of 12 bridges. And that's definitionally not what you intended to do in the beginning. It doesn't have all the full firepower of our stronger, better tanks. And so it lands in these kind of middle areas of mush that it doesn't actually have all of this value. And so what ends up happening is we've bought 30 of them. They were called the Booker tank. It was right when I got here, and they said we're going to stand up a couple of units because we already have 30. We might as well buy 90 or a couple of hundred. We already have them, and then it'll be fine. We'll just leave them there and keep them for a while. And I was like, no one wants this. Everyone thinks it's a bad outcome. And like this is the definitional sunk cost theory, but no one owned the decision. It just kind of floated back through all of these different processes. And so we were going to make this decision that almost every single person agreed was a bad idea. And we were just going to do it because of the momentum of our decision-making process. And so we have started, and a couple of weeks ago, we kicked off this new process that we are blowing up those 18 steps. We are essentially going to go down to more of a Scrum-like model where we're going to put one person from every team that needs to make a decision onto a team. They will live and work together. They will have essentially a CEO of a vertical. So if you thought of like wheeled vehicles, we will have a CEO of that who will report up to essentially me and General George. And we will be able to have access to what they're working on and empower them to be able to knock things out of their way. And then kind of more specifically, we're going to task them with these time-based goals that they have to come up with, like our new helicopter we're trying to build. Originally, they told us it would be 40 months until we could fly a prototype. We basically got all of the CEOs of these massive companies on board and said, you have 12 months. We want to sit in one and fly one. And so we're trying to repeat that exercise all across the way and empower them to basically say, do these mini sprints, figure out if things are working or not, cut requirements where you have to, and just get us things that are good enough, because the exquisite stuff is taking so long, it's spitting out so ineffectively, inefficiently, and so expensive that it's binarily broken. We just have got to start to use more of a Scrum sprint mentality that gets us to minimum viable products, that gets it in the hands of soldiers to start to use, and then we'll improve it over time, rather than trying to imagine what do we need in 3 to 10 years and build that exquisite thing 3 to 10 years before we actually need it.
What is the reaction of the organization? Because usually there's sort of like a bureaucratic, immune system, that fights that kind of change. What have you come across?
So one of the most remarkable parts of having joined is, so I was in 18 years ago, got out, did law school, worked in investment banking, spent time with a private equity firm, a VC fund, worked at small companies. I have tons of buddies that worked at the McKinseys and the big law firms. And like what I would have guessed were these really talented individuals at problem solving. And coming back to the Army, I think I can say after 16, 18 years of experience with really talented individuals in all of these other sectors, like the average American soldier is infinitely better at just getting a task, understanding a problem, and getting to a solution quicker or more quickly. And so I think from my experience with almost every single soldier I have talked to, they are so excited for this transformation. They are so excited to be able to like make their lives better, improve the tools they're using and the way that they're training to make the odds that if we send them to go to war on our behalf, that they come home safely with their buddies. They all seem really fired up. I think the civilians have been a little bit more cautious because they've probably seen this tape run a few times where you get people like me and General George coming in and saying, we're going to make this change. We ended up subbing out. The next leader comes in and doesn't support the same model. The system has won generally most times throughout their lifetime. And so it's been a little bit, I think it's taken a little more coaxing to get them excited about the idea that like most of them are patriots and they want to do the right thing for soldiers. And so I think we've won them. I think that the batch of people we're having the hardest time with right now are the politicians. They're not in a bad way. Their portfolios are really large. They're distracted across a lot of different things. And because their voters aren't yet telling them that this is important to them,
Right.
they're just not as incentivized quite yet to get on board. I think we're going to use a lot of this fall trying to go out and tell this story to the American voter on how important this is for their own safety, the safety of their sons and daughters and grandsons and granddaughters, that like they actually just need to incentivize their leaders to care about this and do what we would say is the right thing. And so they've been the slowest to adopt.
Right. I mean, I was just thinking how many transformation programs have these civilians been through? I'm sure 30 or 40 in their career. So how are you going to fight that sort of baked in cynicism? Because you're right. They're working in defense because the mission, like no one, claws their way to middle management in the Pentagon because they just want to crush dreams. They want to do
That's
something.
right. Yeah,
they're here to do stuff.
Yep.
But they have been sort of beaten up by this system. How are you going to work through that cynicism?
I think one of the things we've been trying to do is model the behavior from the top. And so every meeting we have, we try to do a couple of things. We try to tell the story of why we're doing it. We try to empower them to kind of ask questions and the no bullshit, like, hey, why do you think we're going to fail? Why does this not make sense for what you're seeing day to day? Like we always try to say there are no consequences here. Like just tell us what you think. And then what we've tried to do is highlight places where we're succeeding. And so like if I think of our materiel command, we kicked off a couple of weeks ago a partnership with one of the big AI companies to essentially try to go fix our procurement contracting. It's a very narrow, niche thing. But what we think is we can cut our contracting down by 50%, make it a lot faster, a lot more effective and efficient. And what we're trying to do is tell stories like that across the Army. Another example is we went and visited this company called Applied Intuition. And so this was one of my first weeks in the building. And this company builds autonomous software for a ton of vehicles in the U.S., but they don't do it. They have no military use cases. And so we were touring it and we were asking them, like, why haven't you ever done this with a military vehicle? And they said, well, it's awful. Like the process to get approved is terrible. And then the paperwork is terrible. And then it takes a really long time. And then most importantly, we actually don't even know how we would make money with all of you because your process for buying things is just completely, we're unable to see into it. And so what we did is we basically said, hey, get them a Humvee and get them this infantry squad vehicle, an ISV. We got it to them within 7 days. And then the company said, well, what do you want us to do with it? We said, just anything. Take 10 days, anything you can possibly do. Just send us a video. So 10 days later, they show us a video. They had completely automated these two vehicles. They had tied it into their drone network. We picked it up with a carrier transport truck, got it to our soldiers for training. And then 5 days later, we're able to share back with this company how our soldiers were actually using what they were building. And we just checked in with them a couple weeks ago, and that company was saying our soldiers' use case of their vehicles, because we use it in such odd ways with our training, was making their model so much stronger for their commercial purposes that it was kind of this very virtuous cycle. And so what we've tried to do is tell that story down into the formation to the civilians and the soldiers, empowering them to say, if you have a thing you want to try and test it, just do it. Like, it's okay if it goes wrong. It's okay if it doesn't scale. Just bring in new partners and see how you can try to work with them to make soldiers' lives better.
How do you systematize that? When you're Secretary of the Army and you do that, everyone's going to say, yes, sir, we will make that happen.
That's right.
And how do you make it so that's the normal way of working?
So the at least, particularly on the soldier side, the good thing about the Army, one of its weaknesses is also its strength. And so its weakness perhaps is very clear, delineated chain of command with nearly every step laid out for most jobs and tasks. The intent is if you wear a uniform and you go down, or for whatever reason we have to sub someone in, they know exactly where everything is already existing in the trucks. They can step into any truck at any moment, know where all the equipment is. And so standardization is both perhaps for creativity, one of our weaknesses, but also one of our strengths. If you want to push change down through the system, you can actually do it remarkably fast for a 950,000 person organization and get very little pushback, because the training model of a soldier is follow your orders. And so we on that side are pushing down through the chain of command through these exercises called TIC, transformation in contact, this idea that you at the soldier level should be taking your company or corporate credit card, going to Walmart, going to Target, going to the electronics store, buying things, using it in your training, testing it, figuring out what works, pushing those lessons up through the system and getting them back up to the Pentagon. It actually works reasonably quickly. And my impression is when we travel around that it's actually making a difference in how soldiers are thinking about their day-to-day. On the civilian side, it's a little more complicated because the chain of command is a little bit mushier. It's a little bit more like a typical corporate experience to show up to work every day. You have a little bit more autonomy. So it could be a little better for creativity. It's not as good necessarily for pushing things down as quickly. And so I think what we've been trying to do there is we've started doing what we're calling like weekly or biweekly walkabouts. Mm-hmm. So me and the other leadership are walking around the Pentagon. We're going and we're talking to them. We're trying to answer their questions and trying to empower them with this idea that you can do what I actually think they wanted to do when they joined, which is be really good at their job, be really innovative, be really creative, and make the tools and the weapons that they're helping to acquire better for soldiers. And so a lot of it is just trying to push through in the cultural way these changes. From a systematic reward perspective, I think what we've started to try to look at is there a way to promote people out of order? Is there a way to give bonuses? On the margins there is, but the system is basically set up not to do it at scale quite yet. And so all of that was probably a far too long-winded way of saying, I don't know that we figured out a systematic way to do it, but importantly, we haven't proven yet that any of these approaches is creating disproportionate results. So we're probably like pre-scaling.
Right. Because what I've seen is, someone in the military, and this is not the Army, I'm using examples, another branch. So, the officer has the money, wants to spend the money, wants to go buy this thing, like, oh, that's the solution to my problem. And it takes a year to spend money that's already been approved.
Yeah.
To buy the thing that's been approved to buy.
Yep.
Why is that okay?
So that again, back to strengths and weaknesses. The strength of the system is, I would say, the American soldier. When you give an order and you pass it down, like the game of telephone, it actually holds pretty transparently, pretty accurately on each step of the telephone game. And by the time it gets to, let's say, the private or the second lieutenant doing the thing, if you give them an order, they will stay within the very specific guidance of that order and execute it with a win rate that I think is remarkable. I think some of the problem of that is you very narrowly define what is an acceptable outcome. And so because we, for the last 30 and 40 years, have not fought against a peer that has required us to innovate as quickly as what you're seeing in Ukraine, I think we have created a culture where commander's intent is this really important concept of, hey, I'm just going to give you my intent, and then I know you are going to be better at just executing.
Go take that hill.
Yes. I think we have probably trended away from commander's intent, and we have gotten to very specific execution of orders, and we are trying to push it back to commander's intent. Because if we stay within these very narrowly defined lanes, in a future conflict, it's going to be very bad outcomes.
That leads me to something I wanted to ask you about. You've written about how you want agile leaders. Now, the Army is very good at making leaders. That has been for a long time. What is an agile leader to you? How is it different?
I think back to this commander's intent idea. An agile leader is somebody that knows the end state. There's this concept, one of our special forces units, one of the ones they have many movies on, the Delta team or the unit. Basically, they have this idea of this book. I think it's called Message to Garcia. And so essentially, and I haven't read the book, it's like 50 pages. I just got it on Amazon yesterday. But essentially the concept is when you get guidance, just move out and go get it done. Like, don't ask questions. I mean, to its most extreme. Yeah. Don't ask questions. Just go get the goal done. However you have to do it. Disappear into the world and go achieve things and make it happen. And so I think an agile leader is somebody that just understands commander's intent. Come hell or high water, they empower and enable their leaders and the people under them to just get to that goal. And they are unwilling to accept failure. And I actually think the American soldier, in my mind, we're celebrating our 250th year this year. We're older than the United States as a country And a lot of that, very specifically, and not trying to be exaggerate here, is because the American soldier has built this country in really, really hard times. They show up and they win. And so I think we have got to continue to reinforce this idea that this is a very noble profession, that you are serving on behalf of your countrymen and willing to go pay the ultimate price, which is with your life for them. And in order to be the best version of that, you have to accept whatever the mission you were given is, whether it's a procurement mission, whether it's a beautification mission, which is what's happening right now in DC, whether it can be this full spectrum of things that you can be called on to do as a soldier, but you just get it done and you do it well and you do it better than anybody else. And so I think, to me, that's an agile leader.
So if we have this conversation in 2 years, what are the measures? What are the metrics? How will you know if you're having the impact you want to have?
The quantitative measures, I think, actually are reasonably easier to come by. I think if you looked at how quickly are we procuring things like software, our current software procurement model is just pathetic. It is, we basically require all of these custom solutions to exist on our NIPRNet that I was describing earlier. And the problem is, by the time you customize it for us, it's already outdated. It can't get kind of regular commercial updates. We have to pay people to own it for us. It can't talk to a lot of the other software things we buy. And so I think on that stuff, it will actually be easier to quantitatively say, how fast are we buying software? How quickly are we able to scale it through the formation? How often do we have to update it? And we could do NPS scores for soldiers to see, is the user experience better? So that part seems easier. I think on the procurement of our stuff, our weapons, our wheeled vehicles, the stuff that flies, our drones, similarly, I think you could look, and right now, the speed with which we can acquire drones on the battlefield in Ukraine, you have to be able to acquire and update them every 2 weeks. I think right now we would struggle in under a year to do it. I'm really optimistic in the coming months we'll be able to close that gap. But again, you could kind of quantitatively define, like, is there success there? I think to the agile leadership portion of the thing, it will be a little bit more complicated to define success. I think what you would probably see is we have these very specialized TIC units now, these transformation and contact units that we've said, hey, you're our leader for innovation. And then we measure them. We've set up solutions or systems for them to get us their solutions that they're discovering all the way up to the Pentagon and through our procurement system so that we can learn to train and learn to buy those things. I think what you would probably see in 2 years is every unit in the Army acting like a transformation and contact unit, every unit innovating, every unit going to the store and figuring out kind of MacGyver-like solutions for the things that they need. And then my guess is what you would start to see is a tension, but a very healthy tension, where from the ground up, we would start to hear, hey, you're not innovating fast enough. You're not getting me what I need fast enough. My vehicle has been sitting out of order for 30 days. Right now, we have them sitting out of order for 12 to 15 months sometimes, and everyone has just learned and accepted that that is okay. I think what we should hopefully start to feel in 18 months is a lot of pressure and tension from our actual assets, which is our soldiers on the ground, doing the practice of the warfighting functions to get better up at the top, where right now I think we're pushing down on them a lot of these this need to innovate quickly. I'm hopeful that the stream will switch at some point, and that to me will be a huge sign of success, that we've actually turned the culture toward this idea of don't accept good enough, don't accept broken, get to good enough.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting you said hope. I mean, one of the things when I talk to people in large, especially governmental organizations, people talk about learned helplessness. And there's this one-star said, now, JJ, it's not learned helplessness. It's a lack of hope.
Yes, that's
that
right.
The thing can change at all.
That's good. Yeah, no, I agree.
And I just thought that was brilliant. And so, as you were saying, that these are great people that are serving in the Army with civilians in uniform. And I think that what you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is you want to change that lack of hope and saying something can change, because there is this real fatalism. It's just this way forever. There's nothing, people have tried before, there's nothing we can do.
I think we want to empower them to hold us accountable. Our soldiers, our 18 to 24-year-olds that are joining, are soldiers who've been in 25, 30, 35 years, like General George. They deserve the very best our nation has to offer them. And I think we have numbed them to this idea that when they log into their government-issued laptop, it's going to break half the time. We have numbed them to this idea that they have to fill out these physical forms, that they have to lay out every single weapon and count the serial numbers, and just waste so much of their very precious time and the time of the men and the women they're leading. They have just accepted that this is how they have to go about their lives. I actually posit that one of the reasons a lot of people get out of the Army is it's just really hard to live in a bureaucracy if you want to be a very agile, aggressive leader of men and women. And the system that we have created for them robs them a lot of the joy that they can have actually just doing what they joined the Army to do. And so what I'm hopeful is that in 18 to 24 months, we are being held accountable at every base we go to. They're saying, hey, I know I used to spend 24 hours a week on these dumb tasks, but I'm still spending 4 hours a week on these dumb tasks. I want you to get it down to 1 hour a week. Where right now, you don't get a ton of that pushback unless you dig really, really, really hard. And it's generally the people who have only been in 2 to 3 years that are willing to tell it to you. Because once they've been in long enough, I think they've A, gotten numb to it, and B, are more afraid of the consequences.
Right.
And so, but I think the more we have them pushing back against the dumb things in their lives, the better the sign is that we are trying to get to, or we are moving toward being a healthier organization.
So I want to close on 2 questions. The first one is, in this agile transformation, what would you say, and I'm sure you say this all the time, to the average soldier who wants to be a part of this, hey, I want to change the Army for the better. What should they do, like tomorrow?
Yep. So one of the most amazing things to me is we went to basic training. So we were down at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and these are soldiers who've been in for 5 weeks. And these soldiers, what they were doing on their lanes, where they're practicing what they just learned, is they were putting up drones and they were recording themselves do the lane, and then their drill instructors and their drill sergeants were showing them what they looked like from the sky. And then when they would create their concealed areas at night, they would do the same thing. They would fly a drone around and they would do this after action review of like, what do you look like from a drone's perspective? They were then changing each iteration, so each new set of new soldiers that were coming in were learning something from the drill sergeants who were able to capture this tribal knowledge and share it with them. In each iteration, they were getting a little bit better at how they were doing these lanes.
Right.
And again, these are people who were in for 5 weeks. Some of the things those people who were in for 5 weeks were teaching to the drill sergeants, who were sharing it with their leadership, who were getting it up to the Pentagon, and actually changing how we were doing our drone tactics across the entire formation, which is remarkable. So this is somebody
that's wild.
5 weeks in that had just had some new tech device at home that was able to contribute that. And that was making the Army stronger at scale, which is just incredible to me. And so I think what we're going to try to do on a go-forward basis, and what I would tell all of these soldiers is, all of you have the ability to use your external knowledge to make the Army stronger, and all of the leaders above and beside them need to know that they can take those lessons and change, and they can force us above them to change to things that are better. And so we're going to try to processitize, and this is a question everywhere we go. I haven't quite landed on the best way to do it yet. And I think Chief and I have talked about this 500 times, but how do we actually at scale from all of those 450,000 active duty soldiers and 950,000 total soldiers, how do we quantitatively and quantifiably get in all of these lessons learned so that we can say, hey, actually we've seen 1,000 different ways to do this. We've tested them. These 20 ways are best. And now we're going to pick among the 10 and spread them out to just continue to innovate.
Yeah.
We're not quite there yet.
That's a complex problem.
It's a complex problem, but that's where we want to go.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
Each soldier is going to make us stronger, and that's what I would tell them.
And my last question is, so this kind of thinking from leaders, I think there's definitely a generational shift in leadership happening here in the UK, let's see it in Japan. I mean, it's like there is a change that's happening. And as these new generation of leaders take over in industry, I think, and if someone, your age, older, all of a sudden they're the new CEO, they're trying to change this corporation that's been around for a while, what would your advice be to them?
So I think in my personal experience, because you're coming in, I think I was 38 when I got here. I'm now 39, and it's just a
You're ancient at this point.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Look at these graves. I didn't have as many of them. But it's just this massive undertaking where just the sheer volume of humans and dollars and the importance, at least as I weighed it, is one of the more important things a nation state can do is provide security for its people. And so it's this really sacred duty that I think I have to the nation and have to the soldiers who are serving. I guess my take would be to anyone going in is the expertise to transform the thing you're going to probably already exists there. And so ATI, back to the Army Transformation Initiative that we did, I think we started pushing on that 6 weeks after I got here. And so definitionally, and I told this to the 40 of the senators we talked to, and I said it in recorded interviews, almost definitionally, it was not my idea. I couldn't in 6 weeks have even begun to come up with something as substantive for the Army as what I think ATI will end up being as it continues to roll out. That was General George. It was the Vice Mingus. It was the Sergeant Major of the Army Weimer. It was the undersecretaries before me. It was all of these different people who had been working on this problem for a very long time. And they had 98% of the solution already in their brains and existing in these kind of disparate silos. And much of the exercise in the first couple of weeks was just learning from them what they thought we needed to do, aggregating it into a plan. And then I think kind of crucially, just giving them the air cover to go do it. And just if there was anything contributed in this specific role that I don't know if it would apply as much in like a regular business, but it could, is I aspire to just give them the left and right political limits of what is palatable to our broader leadership outside of the meetings we're in, because I have a bit of a sense for that. And then the air cover to go do the thing that they think they want to do. When we get stuff wrong, as long as they were doing it with noble intentions, let them keep going in the same way that President Trump and Secretary Hegseth had given me the air cover, and then just try to get it done as fast as humanly possible. Because back to time, I think in this job in particular, if you think of how our political system is structured, we have midterms, we have just the longer you are in a place, the harder it gets to act. And so we talked that basically we thought the window for change was like 9 to 12 months. And then we would basically be executing on that change for the remainder of whatever time I'm here and General George is here. And so those first couple of weeks, we just said, all right, I mean, it was almost like we were like the hyper-focused in every meeting of get the plan together and just get it out into the world and start running after it. And my impression today is by acting so quickly, we built up some momentum that has helped us go do newer and different and harder problems versus if we had sat for a long time, spent the first 6 months getting my bearings and trying to figure out what is the best use of our time going forward. I think we would have lost the ability to create momentum.
So don't wait.
Don't wait, just do. That was a much more succinct summary. You're good. You're very good.
Well, thank you very much, Dan. This has really been great. Thanks for taking your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
The Agile CEO is brought to you by Scrum Inc. In today's fast-paced world, adaptability is key. Our expert consulting services tailor transformations that drive measurable success, creating resilient, high-performing organizations. Whether you're leading a team, managing an organization, or guiding enterprise-level change, we're here to support your journey. Transform with confidence and achieve the outcomes that matter. Learn more at scruminc.com.